Many Constant Worlds is a meta-disjointed journey through the Dark Tower series by Stephen King. I am Kat, she, her, and I have different perspectives on things after reading Stephen King's on writing.
I'm Taryn, he, they, and Robin Hood is not a furry because he's a guy in most of the stories. Like Disney's Robin Hood is not furry, but we decided that the Lion King...
No, you decided. I still argue that Robin Hood does count for, like, if you're into furries, like, valid.
Yeah, I don't. But that, like, Robin Hood... No, not Robin Hood. The Lion King probably is, because they're not. And this comes straight from my personal experience. Because Robin Hood in the movie didn't feel like a fox. He felt like a guy. And... like, Little John did, Friar Tuck did, Maid Marian did, but, like, the little rabbits and shit felt like little rabbit kids, and, yeah.
Fair enough, and to each their own, and to be clear, no one is shaming furries.
No.
Like, I hear you guys are generally very nice people, so...
Wasn't it furries who found Project 2025 and, like, leaked it?
I have no idea.
They did something.
I know that I saw a lady on TikTok who was talking about, like, because they'd had a big furry convention there, and she's like, these people are always fucking sweet as hell when they come through. I love them. They're wonderful to have around. Plus, they bring tons of money into our local economy, so... Yeah. I fucking adore furries. And I'm like, cool, okay.
No, like, I don't want to brush any group of people with, like, with the same stroke. Like, you don't ever want to generalize like that. But overall, my understanding is that not only is the furry community a pretty good community, but they're very good at self-policing. Yeah. So no, I'm not trying to, it was a conversation that we had before, and this, unfortunately, was off recording, so it's not something that you're going to get on our Patreon.
No. But you know what? Furries aside.
Yeah.
Welcome back!
Doesn't have to be furries aside. What if we just talked about furries?
Well, this was actually a pretty good book, so, but yeah, no, welcome back to Behind the Mic. Megan helped out for a couple of episodes.
Thank God for Megan.
Right? She is our fairy pod mother. We are finally continuing The Shining. We had to stop in the middle of it, and this is actually quite a good book. It's held up. I have thoughts about that now. So we fully support trigger warnings and taking care of your own mental health. So here are all the warnings for this book and thus this episode. You know what's really funny is, like, all of the warnings I had to put onto the on-writing episodes. Didn't expect that. More than I anticipated.
I did expect that.
So for this one, we've got alcoholism, violence, child abuse, racial slurs, domestic abuse, murder, blood, addiction, physical abuse, death, gore, racism, emotional abuse, mental illness, death of a parent, confinement, toxic relationship, body horror, sexism, sexual content, suicidal thoughts, fire, gaslighting, grief, car accident, homophobia, ableism, child death, torture, pedophilia, sexual assault, sexual violence, body shaming, stalking, and animal death. So we read part 4 of The Shining, titled Snowbound. The snow has come and trapped the Torrances in the Overlook. This section begins with Jack having a nightmare, remembering his father's brutal beating of his mother with 7 whomps. 7 is the number surrounding Jack and The Shining in general. We've had it come up other times. Anyway, so Jack hears his father on the radio and ends up destroying it, cutting the family off from the rest of the world even further, as now they have no means of contacting anyone. Wendy hears Jack and goes to check on him. She finds him with the broken radio, and eventually the two of them come across a dissociated Danny with bruises on his neck. Danny assumes they are Jack's doing and hauls Danny away. Jack, irritated he was accused, dissociates himself, imagines the bar filled with people and booze, orders 20 martinis, 1 for every month he's been sober and 1 to grow on, 'cause 19. You did an intake there, like you have a thought.
No, I have a lot of thoughts. I'm trying to wait.
Okay. Wendy decides while she is worried about their safety around Jack, she does need him to get Danny down the mountain. Danny reveals to his parents that what he saw in room 217. Jack goes to check it out, gets freaked out himself, but he doesn't actually see anything. He starts to reason that Danny shouldn't have been trespassing in the first place. Wendy pushes Jack to making plans to use the snowmobile to escape the hotel. Jack is, check it out, He wakes in room 217 where he sees George, whom he once again beats, but as he's doing so, George turns into Danny. Jack does go to check out the snowmobile, and it was just his luck that he had all the things he needed. It is noted that something was looking out for him, and it couldn't have irritated him more.
How dare the universe
try and do him a solid.
I know.
He also had realized that he was the weak one. The hotel was fucking with them, and that he was the problem. He does ultimately sabotage the snowmobile. From here, when Danny tries to pry into Jack's head, he finds his father staring at him like he knows what he's up to. Time passes. There's nobody wearing glasses, but that's really the cue. Danny goes to the playground. He believes the hedge animals aren't a threat because they're covered in snow. First, he gets chased in a concrete ring by something he believes to be a dead child. Very It fashion. Like It, capital I. But he manages to escape it. When he gets back out to the sun, now the hedge animals are coming for him. And this is the thing that freaked me out about the hedge animals. Because we had that first encounter with Jack, and I was like, oh, that wasn't so bad. Why was I scared of that? This must have been the one that freaked me out.
Yeah.
Danny must move carefully and quickly to the porch before the hedge animals get to him. He makes it just barely, but his leg is attacked. When Jack and Wendy get to him, he tells them about the hedges and realizes his dad has a similar experience. Jack tries to gaslight Danny and brush the whole thing off. The whole family is woken up by the elevator just spontaneously starting up in the night. Wendy insists they check it out together. She and Danny are hearing old voices and music. Jack claims to hear nothing, but when he gets the elevator stopped, Wendy moves up to it and shows him confetti, party hats, and a cat mask, asking if that was a hallucination too. Danny starts dividing the hotel into safe and unsafe places. He ends up looking at a wind-up clock and falling into a blackness where he briefly reaches Tony, who tells him he cannot reach him anymore, that they won't let him, and that Danny needs to try and reach Halloran, because it is realized that Danny is the key to the wind-up clock that is the Overlook. He has freed the tiger from the cage, so he tries to shine at Dick to call for help.
You were able to summarize it really quickly, but so much happened.
So much happened.
In this section. It's still a really good book.
Yeah.
My feelings about come from a dislike of Jack Torrance at this point.
Oh, yeah.
Rather than a dislike of the book itself.
Yeah.
Because when I tell you, I'm so sick of his bullshit at this point. That was the prevailing thought.
We get it, Jack.
Well, no, more like I am just so sick of this man's whining. His son is having legitimate issues. His wife is having legitimate issues. But everything is just about
him.
Yeah, not even just about him, but about his, the scene where he is trying to fix the snowmobile, but not really wanting to fix the snowmobile.
Yeah.
Makes such a good point of it. And we've been seeing it since the very beginning of the book, where he has this feeling of just, I was meant for more. Like, the image of him having to get food stamps and all of that.
Yeah.
That stood out to me really strongly, of just constantly thinking he's too good.
Yes.
For everything, for every piece of everything.
I saw someone fairly recently, it was probably on TikTok, and they were talking about, a bunch of people would argue that the reason that Overlook wanted Jack Torrance was because he was strong, and they're like, no, he wasn't. The point is that he is weak. He is a weak man. That's why the Overlook wants him. Danny is strong and they'd love to consume that power, but they know how to get Danny because he's a 5-year-old little boy. It's to take the weak man who's supposed to protect him, who even when he's staring at that snowmobile is like, yeah, I got to get them out of here, but fuck, I'm not gonna.
Yeah.
I'm literally going to not do this. I realize. And he even mentions when they're getting Danny after the hedge animal incident on the porch, he even says, he wishes Wendy had asked him what Danny meant by and he would have told her everything. But God forbid he be perceived as weak and just tell his wife, hey, Danny's not wrong. I did have a similar experience with those same hedge animals. We need to get out of here. We are in danger. Instead, he needed her to prompt it.
Well, and when they're both hearing something in the elevator, they're both hearing something. And he's just, well, if you two want to be crazy,
Yeah.
you can be crazy. And it's like, my dude.
Right?
My dude. I think another good example of it was when Danny first comes down and he has the marks on his throat. And Jack, I think it's before he goes into the bar, but it's one of the things that sends him into the bar. It may have been a thought when he goes in, but he's thinking, Wendy is never, it doesn't matter what I do, she's always going to look at me as, she'll always be looking for, drink on my breath. She'll always be looking for, if I hurt him again, she'll always be looking for, these things. And it's like, dude, you ruined their lives. You broke he's only 5 now. You broke his arm when he was younger.
Yeah, and he idolizes you.
Yeah. You have tore up her life, and you consistently are the worst. At one point, he is talking to her, and he talks down to her.
Yeah.
The same way he talks down to everybody, but he says something about sociology to her. And I'm like, that's her fucking degree! And you're telling her what it's about. I think that was the point where I'm like, I can't anymore. I fucking hate this dude so badly. I don't know if he's being presented as like kind of a blowhard, but actually kind of an okay guy. I don't remember what the exact quote was, but he was saying something to Wendy and just goes, that's a thing that they do in sociology, And she didn't come back and go, yeah, I know. That's what, it wasn't presented as some kind of repartee. It was very much him telling her, mansplaining her degree to her.
Yeah.
And
So, one of the notes I have in my notebook on this section is just that, Jack hates Wendy. He hates her so much. And it's because he hates himself.
Yeah.
And he basically has, projected that all onto her. And it comes from that shit of, he has to tell her about her degree. Because he doesn't actually know about her degree, and how dare she have one. Even if he has one, that's not the point. Jack hates himself so fucking much, and he has put the weight of all of that hatred onto Wendy. Yeah. To the point that he fucking hates his wife. Which, tale as old as time.
Yeah.
And it's awful, because it makes for that toxic relationship where she takes it. She does let him mansplain her degree to her.
I have a different take. I think there are times where he has... I don't think he hates Wendy. I think there's times where maybe he has hatred towards her. And I think you're right. I think it's like a reflection.
Yeah, because it's not actually about Wendy.
Yeah.
Because she does remind him of his failures, and that's when he hates her the most.
He feels so inferior. He is so worried that he's inferior.
Yeah.
And I think that he loves and idolizes Wendy. And what Wendy represents, which is his, this is the last bit of success that he still has. He has Wendy.
And he's got his hand on her ankle.
Yes, exactly. And in order to try and keep her, and I think he doesn't want to feel threatened. He feels so threatened by everyone around him all the time.
Including his son.
That he has to constantly be reminding everybody that he's the smartest guy in the room. Because he has no self-confidence at all.
No. Because he hates himself so fucking much.
Yeah. I really underestimated how exhausting it would be to read about a person. I'm impressed by how on the nose it is.
Well, and you know what? This is the thing that I have developed after reading On Writing. Because in On Writing, Stephen King says that with The Shining, he was just writing himself, but he didn't realize it.
Yeah.
And I can believe that. I can believe that statement. It may or may not be true. Not my job to decide if it is. But I could believe it regardless, because I've always thought that this book was just him writing about himself, because we have an alcoholic author who's struggling to get by with his wife and young son. And he did teaching, and we, you know, in the life that I have lived, because this book is older than I am, this has always been accessible and out there. Cool. So I've always thought that. I did not know that he did not realize he wrote himself. And I think that's why it is one of those moments that's just like, no, you nailed it. You nailed this character. Because especially since you are married to another writer who has published books herself. I mean, Tabitha King is not as prolific as Stephen King. And unfortunately, she does tend to get attached to him a lot, which is really a shame. But you are with a woman that all through that book, you clearly have some sort of reverence for. You, at this time, it was before he got clean on his own drinking.
Yeah.
We know Danny is modeled after Joe. And you are with a woman who has a degree, and the story that he tells about when he met her sounds like she was a better poet than him. And things like that. And I don't know, because I haven't read any of her work. She might be a better writer than him. We know she's the reason that he has a career. He even attributes it to her. And Jack Torrance is very real. And he's real in a way that you can imagine. Those are valid feelings. Thank God that, like, this isn't the path that Stephen King chose to take. But it is a very real place, and I think that's why Jack comes across so legitimate, because he did end up writing himself. Whether he meant to or not, he wrote himself.
Just as a disclaimer, Kat is explaining this for anybody who has missed the last couple episodes. You don't want to miss those. Again, Megan is the best. And also for me, because I haven't got a chance to read on writing yet, and I have not listened to those episodes either. Listen to them with me. We all need to go and listen to those. But
if you want to hear Megan rage about writing advice, it is pretty like, it's nice.
And it's just been tough trying to even get back behind the mic and all.
Yeah.
And we value self-care.
We do. We do value self-care.
So a note I had as we were reading, and a note that I made as you were going through the sum up, was how dare the universe try and help Jack yet again.
I know, it tried so hard. It's like, come on, man, we keep throwing out a lifeline. Stop setting it on fire.
Yeah. And self-sabotaging, because it's constant. And I can say from experience, it's something that you do when you have that, like, hatred of yourself. I think that's such a mirror, which I feel like after, because I get the background information. You all need to go listen to the last couple episodes if you don't know what was happening with On Writing. I got the live sum up, so I know a little bit of what was in there. We can say with a little more certainty now, that is such a mirror into, I don't know.
I do feel like that amount of realism is part of what makes this book so well written compared to the other stuff we've read. Because regardless of the parts of, like, Derry and it that he feels like reflect his boyhood, there are things in there that are just like, that's not a reflection of your boyhood, sir. But
it's nobody's boyhood.
Yeah. This is so something that is very tangible, and your execution of it was really good. I haven't felt as much like that this book has had a ton of just filler, which I felt like a lot of it had a ton of just filler.
Yeah.
And it's like, why did we even need some of this? We could have cut this out, you know? And it's more than just the, you know, controversial orgy scene between children. We could have cut that out too, but there's a lot of other things I would have also cut out of it. So far with The Shining, I would say that, one, for how long this book is, it's not hard to read. I want to keep reading it. And there are things that I feel like have quality in most of the scenes. There are maybe a couple of bits where I'm like, this feels a little repetitive, but it's much smaller amounts. I don't think I would have ended up with like half the book like I would with it, where it's like, nah, if I took some scissors to this and chopped out the bits we don't need, we'd have like half a book left.
No, that's really true. Even the repetition has felt purposeful and like it's there to either inform more about the characters or to keep driving the plot along.
Yes.
Or the situations along.
Yes. Stephen King writes situations.
Which are not the same.
He does not write plots. He writes situations. As featured in episode 26. I think that's in part 1. Episode 26 might be in part 2, but regardless.
I cannot. They're not the same.
They're not the same.
I don't know if it's just because one is outlined and one isn't.
I think to him, it's just not how he views it. Like, it's in his brain. You remember years ago, you and I were talking about kitchen utensils. And you had called, like, a rubber spatula a spatula. And I'm like, I've never, like, my family never called it that. I don't know. Because you're trying to tell me what thing to grab. And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. That I gave you a spatula. Like, no, what are the rubber ones? And I'm like, oh, you know what? That makes sense that it would be called a spatula. But literally I've never called that. And you asked me, like, well, what would you call it? And I was like, we didn't, like.
But how would you ask for one?
Never had to.
And I will say, I think that's a difference between sides of families.
No, but that's my point.
I come from a big family, and there's a lot more people in the kitchen all the time. You did not, and so you didn't have to.
No, absolutely. And so, like, it's just one of those moments of that the vocabulary wasn't there.
Yeah.
But it makes perfect sense.
He was a teacher. The vocabulary needed to be there.
I'm not going to lie. At this point, I don't think he was a good teacher. He was a teacher that existed, and hey, he did the teaching. But frankly, from the shit that he says himself that he did, I would not have wanted Stephen King as a teacher. It probably would have turned me off of writing.
That sounds like writing in high school. I mean, but he was a college teacher,
I think he was a college teacher.
That sounds like writing in college.
I don't know. He has some internal things that he clearly needed to sort out in at least 2000. I don't know if now here in the year 2024 he's figured some of it out.
I'm going to make a stand right now. I am going to, this might be controversial. I don't want Stephen King as a teacher in the year of our Lord 2024.
No. But
I would not want him as a teacher fucking now.
God, no. My point is more just the disdain with which he spoke about, like, jocks and cheerleaders in his courses and, like, well, they just want an easy essay or some shit like that. I don't approve of. I think that that's bad teacher. If you are so against trying to teach those kids because you have some idea about who they are, you didn't bother to get to know your students in any way or give them the benefit of the doubt.
Here's what I remember about the jocks and the cheerleaders. I'm making finger quotes. You can't see. I realized you can't see. Kat can see. Y'all can't see. I'm making finger quotes. What I remember being in college of the quote-unquote jocks and cheerleaders was that they had very full schedules. Most of them wanted to also have social lives because we all do.
Yeah.
They had school, they had practice, they had games, they had shit they had to do, and they do not get paid. And we went to the same college that turned out Colin Kaepernick.
Yeah.
Because that was a huge deal
oh my God,
when we
I
were
know.
going there.
I know.
Because that was when he was a big deal before everything that came out. I liked him better after everything that happened because every story that we ever heard going to college was that he was not super nice, but most of the college athletes weren't. They were tired. So and also they were not, it doesn't matter. This is not the point. The point that I'm trying to make is, of course, they wanted easy shit or they wanted to write about very specific shit. They had to, I guess I don't know when he was being a teacher or where he was being a teacher, but usually they have to keep a certain grade point average. Though a lot of schools kind of grease the wheels for that shit. And again, they're not getting paid for doing the shit that makes the schools all the money. They get none of it.
Yeah. No,
I have
true.
feelings about student athletes.
No.
Which I was... If you've watched our live streams on Twitch, it will surprise none of you that I wasn't one. So...
Absolutely true, and that's why it's like, I don't think Stephen King was maybe a good teacher. I don't know, and hey, if you were a student of Stephen King's, please tell me. I'd love to hear what your experience was. The persona he has presented by his own words as the teacher that he was, I can say I don't think he was a quality teacher.
Who's gonna talk shit about Stephen King as a teacher now? Who's gonna come out and be like, no, Stephen King was the worst. Had him as a teacher, dropped his class, would never take it again. Like, who?
No,
who?
And that's fair,
We only
especially
do because
all that
no
long,
one listens to this. Like,
all that long ago. You may not even remember or anything like that. But it's the same as, like, in The Shining, Jack starts to realize he no longer sympathizes with George.
yeah.
Well, the character that is essentially George in his play. I can't remember what the character's name is in the play. But it's essentially, it's the student.
Either.
It's the student character. Now he's, like, flipping the script, and now he's more into the headmaster's side, and feels like the headmaster is actually the one who's getting put out, because getting old is when you kind of shift in who's the hero.
It never seemed to me that this play meant to portray the headmaster as, no, or that Jack had any sympathy for the student in the play. And I get where he's going, where he's saying, well, I always sympathize with everybody that I write. I think Jack might have been confusing sympathizing with his own characters with, I worked really hard on this and I'm proud of it.
Well, and identifying yourself within your characters.
And also, like, it's fiction. The way that he's talking about, well, I wrote this truly horrible character and I had sympathy for him. It's like, yeah, you created the monster. You can put the amount of monstrosity within that you would choose to. You have now written this play where you have written it so close to something that you experienced, where you're in one part of it. There is someone that you felt victimized by, even though you absolutely were not victimized by that person. That, of course, maybe you're having a little trouble seeing it from the other side. By that point of this section, I was so deep into my shut the fuck up, Jack Torrance mode that I didn't care. I just wanted more Wendy and Danny, so.
Well, and I mean, early on when Jack is thinking about and talking about the play and everything, he talks about it more like, yeah, the student is technically the hero, and the headmaster just wants to help the student, like, make the right choices, while maybe not always being perfect. They're not bad either. They just want what is best, because that's what Jack believes he was doing with George. He thinks that's what he was being. Because, it's the whole, like, you either die the hero or live long enough to become the villain. Jack is living long enough to start becoming the villain in his own stories, which is why we get that dynamic shift. And, all of it is supposed to be like a coming of age story. I actually feel like this is a better way to kind of create that, like, imagery of, like, yeah, no, you die young, or you live long enough to really hit that point where, you are the cranky old person. And even if you want the best for somebody, because you're like, man, I've been here before, please don't make the same mistakes. I can help you. Let me help you. The reality is that if somebody doesn't want your help, you can't force it on them anyway. And when you get more aggressive, as Jack does, about like, no, let me help you, you're not helping anymore now. You're controlling, and you're not doing it for the right reasons, because this isn't about them anymore. It's about you.
Yeah.
And your issues with aging, with the way your life has turned out, with the choices that you've made. And you're never going to be able to swap places with that person.
Yeah, going back to our very first episode on The Shining, it's one of the symptoms of codependency is when you try to force help on somebody else and then get rageful when they won't take that help.
Which she does with Wendy often.
Oh, yes. I'm actually really surprised how much that is in Jack, and then we're not seeing as much of that in Wendy. But I did come into this expecting it to reflect the movie so much more. I see why Stephen King was so pissed about the Kubrick film, because it's not the bar scene. We have to talk about the bar scene.
Let's talk about the bar scene.
We can't.
Not the fun bar scene that neither of us participate in, because we don't go outside. Yeah. We also aren't really big drinkers.
I don't have enough organs left to, deal with that. Doesn't matter. So actually, that was part of why I paused, because I wanted to ask, but I figured I'd ask now instead.
Okay.
Dissociation versus delusion, because those are similar, but I feel like they're different. What made you say that he's dissociating in the bar versus having a delusion versus just deeply participating in his imagination, which I feel like those are kind of three separate takes, and we're leaving a shine out of it. And then we'll talk about Danny as well, because you use the term dissociate with Danny as well.
It's this, aspect, because it's not even so much the bar scene itself as much as, that moment right after, Wendy starts accusing him. Jack kind of, goes blank. And Danny, that's what Danny does, is, after he has an encounter, he goes blank. They almost, seem like shells, because they're not there anymore. They have checked out. For whatever reason. It's more like that moment of getting this Spartan out of your body.
We're so old.
300 is a great movie no matter what age you are.
Oh my god.
Lena Headey. Lena Headey is in that, Cersei from Game of Thrones. She does such a good job.
The crossover of the 10 people maybe who listen to this, there's no chance that they haven't already seen 300.
Also Faramir's in it. And he does a great job too. It's a good movie. Also, I've been really focused on not even rebuilding. I already had a pretty decent physical media library, but really building that out. And so it's made me think about movies and their quality in a very different way, especially because we've been watching shit like The Evil Dead.
Building it out so that way we can watch them during the coming apocalypse.
Yeah, and
because as long as we can get a generator hooked up.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it worked in what was it? We were watching Fallout. Those guys were watching old shit.
Yeah.
I still got a VCR. I got 2 VCRs actually, so my VHSs will also still work. But legitimately, just a reminder, you do not own your digital content. You own a license to access digital content, as long as the platform you have purchased the license from also retains their license with the distributing producer of the content.
Hey now, Ubisoft says we need to get used to not owning our games.
Yes, and the dude who did Baldur's Gate says they need to get used to, not making money.
Yeah, he double fingers.
Here for that.
Yeah.
Here for that energy. Fuck everybody with their microtransactions.
It's been about a year since Kat's played anything but Baldur's Gate, and she's wearing an Astarian approved sweatshirt across from me right now.
I am.
I'm looking down. I'm not wearing any merch currently for anything. I was very surprised by the bar scene. It seemed so much more like he was engaging in an imagination moment.
Yeah.
That led into either the Overlook kind of latching onto it. Almost like how Danny gets to Tony sometimes by
Yeah.
Going deep into his mind and himself, because Jack is a writer and he has to engage in that deep imaginative state to do that. There is an idea, less of an idea, like we're shaking it off, I think, to some degree, but certainly in the past, where you kind of leave that behind in childhood to a degree. So as a child, Danny is engaging in that imagination play more, but that it felt so much like that. Like, he didn't see Lloyd, but he talked to a Lloyd. It didn't feel like he was actually talking, like that there was anybody there. He's imagining people who are laughing, but then they begin laughing at him, and that just feels like the exact same, like, anger at himself that he's been having. But it takes on this more sinister tone because the Overlook latches onto it because it's trying to drive him crazy. But that's also been my question. Is it actually driving him crazy, or is he just going crazy?
So he could be. One note that I had made throughout when I was reading this is that the Overlook wants Jack to tell its story. Because it keeps showing him so much of its history. It puts itself out there, whether, it wants to consume him or not, regardless. The Overlook wants Jack to write its story out and, make it real. Almost bring it into existence, because the Overlook isn't real unless somebody writes about what happened at the Overlook. Ultimately, kind of is what turns out to occur, because we get that when we get to Misery, because Annie refers to, oh yeah, the old caretaker burned it down. Spoiler alert for the end of The Shining. But we have already read Misery, and we talked about Annie mentioning that the Overlook burned down. It still made its way into print. It still made its story start to get known. And especially Ullman had been trying so hard to bury that darker side, the gangster murder in the presidential suite, the affluent lady who OD'd in 217, things like that, where they're constantly trying to bury it. And I mean, that's what we think of, especially when we get into a certain level of wealth. And the Overlook is meant to be a very highfalutin hotel where wealthy people go to behave badly then.
We've talked about the fact that I've worked in motels, not hotels, motels. And I bring up the fact that they're motels because you mentioned, well, it's, where highfalutin people go to behave badly. Only, that's normal for, people die in hotels and motels. Yeah. People kill
Often.
themselves. It's actually kind of known that people will check into especially, I think, well, I don't know that it's especially motels, because I would say that because, it's cheaper, but if you know you're not leaving, what does it matter how much money you're spending? So I don't actually know whether or not it's especially one or the other.
Yeah.
But I know that people, because they don't want anyone who cares about them to find their body.
Yeah. Let's just traumatize some staff.
Pretty much. There's shootings, there's drug use, there's heavy drinking, pretty much because people feel at home even though they're not at home.
Yeah.
And people behave badly in their homes because you're comfortable. You almost do it extra because you're not home and someone else will have to deal with the mess. To be honest, it hasn't sounded extra. The gangster murder feels a little extra. I never experienced anything like that. And I never saw a dead body. I never dealt with any of that. But you hear stories. Other staff deal with shit. If the staff know that maybe you can't handle that, you might hear about it, but they'll make sure you don't see it. Or at least the places that I worked were like that. The people that I worked with were amazing.
No, I think that's a lot of really common.
Yeah.
Because it is that, especially if you're a housekeeper, because you're going to be the person who has to open that door. You're going to find shit you don't want to find. Both, in the way of bodies and also in objects.
But part of why I say, oh yes, objects. You make a very solid point.
I did accounting for hotels. Well, motels.
Yeah.
Some of them I think were legitimate hotels too, so.
Yeah.
Both.
A lot of why I say that is, as we've talked about, we live in a tourist location. Yeah. this shit doesn't really hit the news.
No.
It's not a big deal.
Because it happens all the time.
And not just that, but because it's normal to keep it out of the news, so people will keep going.
Yeah.
When that's your industry, when that's what's keeping money coming in, you keep the shit out of the news. None of this is uncommon. It's uncommon if you're not used to it, which I would say Jack and Wendy have no idea.
And Stephen King probably doesn't really have an idea in the 70s when he wrote this.
I would say, yeah, that's very possible. But I think more than that, because I would trust Stephen King to do some level of research, and it does seem like he has.
Oh, no, I think he has.
More than that, I think Jack Torrance, like, he has not changed from the moment he's walked into the book, like, from the first time we see him, which I think is at the Overlook. When he's talking to Almond.
Because he's waiting for his interview, and then he does his interview.
But he hasn't really changed. He's still the same asshole. He is just, like, as he is more isolated, which is such an issue for mental health. And he clearly has mental health issues that he's been self-treating with alcohol for a long time. And with other shit, too. Because I'm really confused what's in this Excedrin he keeps chewing. He's like, oh, I'm getting the high off the Excedrin. I'm like, dude, Excedrin now is caffeine, acetaminophen, and aspirin. I don't know what's in yours, but it doesn't matter how much you chew that. You're not getting...
I think it's the illusion of it.
Yeah.
You know, because you start to associate, if, like, I always, okay, let's take the dogs. Oh, every time we make them, like, trim their nails, we give them a steak.
Yeah,
eventually we would train them to assume one then equals the other. And if Excedrin went with his drinking and the high that he got from, like, being impaired by alcohol, if that's part of his ritual.
Well, and if he also doesn't intake that much caffeine, he might also be getting, like, a caffeine, like, rush as well. Obviously, there's some shit going on with Danny. And we know that the shine itself is a thing, like, that is supernatural.
Yes.
And obviously Danny has some shit going on. Jack, he probably has a shine. It's probably something that he's been suppressing. But otherwise, nothing has changed. And I don't know that the Overlook actually has anything supernatural happening with it. He's... like, even if it's just a place where lots of people have died, that amount of pressure.
Energy.
Yeah, with nothing to take off of it. He feels inferior. He's constantly trying to find what makes him special and what makes him better and prove what makes him better. He's had little successes here and there, but he's looking for the thing. He's realizing this play is not gonna be the thing. He got fired from this other job over here. This job he feels like is really beneath him, and so now he's picking out bits and pieces of the history here to turn it into something more, because as he's talking about through the book, it feels like his very last chance. Which is this pressure on him to make it something else, because what else is he going to go and do? But he thinks he has to make it more than it is. He's got nothing to help him with all of this shit going on. He's got a kid who's going through some shit. A wife who... I think very deservedly does not trust him to not get into the alcohol that is, because there's the cooking sherry that's there, to not have found a way to get alcohol there, and to not hurt their child badly who they cannot get to any emergency services because he's already done it before.
Yeah, especially because, like, in this section, he mixes up something with that cooking sherry to give to Danny.
Which is exactly why I brought it up.
So, we know he knows how.
And he's slowly isolating them more and more and more because it's his last chance. I see what you're saying about, like, the Overlook wants its story told. it feels more like Jack is trying to find a story to tell there. Because he's so desperate to find something. And he's just, I'll be the one, and I'm gonna write this story, and I'm gonna, tell it to the world. And he minimizes it sometimes, but it's to make him feel better about himself. There's a reason that he shoved it in Almond's face. And it was a little bit self-sabotaging, but it was also a little bit like, you thought I was beneath you. And actually, I'm finding all this shit that you didn't even know was here. And Almond's just like, dude, I did know. It's basic hotel shit. Like...
Yeah, like, this is not a surprise to me.
Yeah, you're just kind of stupid. Like, you think you are much smarter than you are because you're used to being, like, you surround yourself with people who are dumber than you. Because if anybody challenges you, you freak out. I have so much other shit that I want to, like, about... Well, not that much about Wendy. Quite frankly...
Wendy's doing her best, man.
Yeah, Wendy is the best.
She's just trying to hold her family together and protect her kid, protect herself, protect her peace. And it's not always the easiest.
Danny, I don't know with Danny. He's a kid. I still feel like he's being written way too high for a 5-year-old. But I feel like if you want to include a child, I would not want to read actual 5-year-old text.
Yeah, no, exactly. Because Danny does think at a higher, like, vocabulary and stuff like that, and his interactions are more mature than he actually is. But no, I wouldn't want to read a 5-year-old text either, because they wouldn't have words or ways to describe some of the stuff that Danny is able to describe.
Yeah.
And I mean, you could argue, oh, it's the shine that causes that, but, I think part of it, no matter what, is going to be that Danny is not written like a 5-year-old.
I mean, maybe some of it is also, he's just surrounded by adults all the time.
Surrounded by adults and has gone through some trauma. It still does, like, no matter what, he is a 5-year-old. And I would expect that there would be more thought space occupied by, like, toys and cartoons. And less about, like, thinking about his parents having sex.
Oh my god, yes, thank you. He's so worried about not just his parents' relationship, but that very specifically.
Yeah, it's weird.
It is weird. I have thought about this. I think it's because he is just a tool to drive along Jack and Wendy. Even though he's in it a lot, he doesn't come across all that much as a character himself super often. I couldn't tell you what Danny likes or what Danny does. He's not meant to be that way.
That's not the way that Danny is being utilized. Like, he's a POV, but it's more so you can see parts of, like, the Overlook, and you can get the internal monologue of Wendy and Jack from a different perspective because of the way Danny's shine works. It's described as, like, seeing colors and these feelings and imagery that he conjures up to go with those feelings that he gets projected off of his parents and of other people. He's kind of like our disembodied third-party narrator.
Yeah.
Only he got a body. He got to be in the book.
Yeah. This book would be really monotonous if it was just Jack and Wendy.
Yes.
If there was no Danny. I wish he was a little older, but if he was a little older, there wouldn't be the same... He would have an awareness that would make things like the fact that he is so worried about them having sex so much weirder because he'd have more of a concept of what that is.
Yeah.
I had a big issue with them just doing it in the room where he was. In this section, they couldn't hold off for like a night? Like, what the fuck was that?
One, I think that's the same as, like, what Wendy says when they had been having sex when Danny had gotten hurt with the hedge animals. Of just, like, what were we doing? We were, like, 2 teenagers.
Yeah.
Who just had their itch scratched, and our kid was out here freaking out, and he ended up getting hurt, regardless of whether or not they believe about the hedge animals. like, Danny's leg was injured. There was visible proof. And this is after he had his incident in 217 where he's covered in bruises. And Wendy believes that there may be someone else in the hotel with them. They comfortably went and had sex and left their kid out in the snow to play.
So do you think that's a symptom of the time when this was written in, when maybe kids were left with a little less supervision? Or in the scene that I'm talking about, Jack is very much, like, trying to distract Wendy.
Yeah, he's trying to, like, make her, like, forget about the stress that's going on.
Well, and also just...
Yeah.
She's trying to talk, and he's like, what if we didn't?
Yeah, I know. He's, like, starts groping her and shit while she's actively having a conversation.
Middle of... Do you think, like, there's an amount of boredom that they're dealing with that kind of changes your brain, maybe? And then there's also... Do you think it could be, like, the Overlook at work of, like, distracting them? Like, hey, what if you guys went and did this? And then we're going to hedge animal Danny. Like,
I do think it's a little bit of both.
Okay.
Of, like, yeah, there's boredom. There's only so much you can do snowed in. And you have your kid constantly. Like, there's no babysitter. There's no, like, man, I just really need a break for, like, an hour. I called someone. They're going to watch the kid for a little bit. We're going to go grab dinner or something. We're just going to have some adult time.
Yeah.
There is constantly a 5-year-old to be dealt with, except for when Danny goes to sleep. But there is continually a child that has to have some level of care, and they don't go anywhere other than to go play. Constant kid, constant boredom, because if you didn't bring enough entertainment, you're fucked.
Yeah.
You know, when you have no services of any kind, you eventually also lose television, unless you have a decent physical media space that you can still, like, pop in a tape or something like that. And we do see, like, in the movie, at least, the Kubrick film, we see them watching TV, and we know from the book that Wendy has books that she's sitting here reading. Jack sounds like his primary, like, entertainment was his typewriter because he meant to work on his play all winter, which means it doesn't sound like he brought something for entertainment. He brought work to his job. So he's working on top of working. He didn't bring entertainment. He has the Overlook. If we go with the fact that the Overlook is something, if it's some sort of world eater like Pennywise, it's also having some influence over them because it obviously has an influence over Jack. That's why we get the nightmare with the dad's voice of, like, kill them all! Beat the shit out of your family, man! And he ends up destroying the radio as a result of that, because he is becoming part of the Overlook, so we know that the Overlook can act through Jack. And the Overlook needed Wendy to calm the fuck down and forget about the things that she's wanting.
Yeah.
And continue to accept Jack's ruling on everything. I think that's what's interesting about having Danny as that third narrator, really. Because when you go into the scenes that are narrated by Jack and Wendy, it is from their perspective. I wouldn't trust Wendy to really talk about the time Jack hurt her if he did. Danny may not have seen it. Danny may not have words for it if he did, especially because if he's getting all of this by kind of going into his parents' brains, if Wendy has stored that information behind something, would Danny be able to dig it out? Because if she's not thinking about it and it's not giving off a feeling or something, where would it go? Because it does sound like there was probably some level of abuse from both of her parents. And Danny doesn't really talk too much about it other than not liking his grandma and not wanting to go stay with his grandma. So as a 5-year-old, could he fathom if something was happening to Wendy? And maybe there wasn't. Jack does seem like he cares for his family in his, like, better moments. It's not a lack of, like, he doesn't not love his wife, and he doesn't not love his son. He does love both of them very much. He's just a very broken man.
That is something that's been interesting, and that was interesting about how they showed his dad as well. There were good moments.
Yeah.
Even with his father, who was the worst.
Yes.
But he remembers some good times as well. And that's generally accurate with most abusers. There's good times. there has to be, because if it's nothing but bad times, people catch on more quickly. Like, there's a whole cycle. I'm trying to keep track of the number of times Danny has been physically hurt by the hotel. I think I've got 3. As of the hedge animals, I think it's 3. Because the wasps, the neck, the leg. Does that sound right?
Yeah, because I think he got his leg done by the hedge animals, which would make 3.
Okay. Yeah. We're up to 3.
The dead boy in the, like, weird concrete ring was very like it. And I mentioned that one in my summary.
The thing couldn't live in the sun. It couldn't come out into the sun. And I don't remember why that felt it related. Because obviously it does come out into the sun, but there was something...
But it does have to make it a gray day for the showdown to happen, and it lives in the sewers.
Yeah. He's absolutely starting to work with meta.
Yeah.
Which is the meta part of our meta disjointed journey.
One thing that I'm seeing in the section with the concrete ring is maybe a huge spider that had burrowed down under the dead leaves, or a rat, or maybe the corpse of some little kid that had died here on the playground.
Yeah! Yeah!
It is so specific. Oh, one thing that I've forgotten I didn't put in here is that Jack starts going into the whole subconscious stuff with, like, Freud. And the, like, different, like, allocations of that. So, whether or not Stephen King actively made certain characters his various parts of his mental existence, he at least knows it's a thing. Last time, you weren't here, but we pulled the Ace of Pentacles. The Ace is indicative of a new venture that manifests in increased wealth or health. It is the beginning of attaining goals.
Ooh.
That was what we ended on writing with, was that gem. We've gotten, I think, the Ace of Pentacles before. We get a lot of aces, actually, I think, if I remember correctly.
It's the 4 of Pentacles.
Ooh, 4 of Pentacles. Okay.
A king sits on a throne with a pentacle upon his crown, with his feet upon 2 pentacles, and then holding a pentacle, but, like, with one hand over it and then one hand under it, like, cradling it and showcasing it. I do think it's interesting that it's a king.
No, I do too, because, like when I tell you about the 4 of Pentacles, especially because next time we're finishing up The Shining, we're reading the rest of the book, and to anybody who's seen the movie, even if it's different, like, you know how this is going to end. We know what's going to happen, right? The 4 is a sign of conservation. It indicates substantial material possession and may reveal protective tendencies. That is the energy we're going into finishing The Shining with. Ooh. Because the cards know what's up. Next time we are finishing off The Shining. That should be both parts 5 and 6, because I think there are 6 parts to this book.
It looks like there was only 5. I could be wrong.
I think part 6 might just be really, really short, if it exists, but I can't remember.
I won't lie, I was looking on Audible.
Okay. Because it might be. No matter what, just finish the rest of the book. That's the core of it. Finish the book. We are finishing The Shining.
Get through it.
Like, yay. We're getting our dramatic, like, bit, and then we're done with this book. It's been a good book. Like,
it has. It really has.
I do think that of the ones that we have read for this podcast, this has been one of the more well-written ones.
I agree. I would encourage all of our listeners to go and find other worlds. And we might also have to.
Yeah. It's been nice. If nothing else, it's been nice.
I love you guys.
Love you, lobsters. You can email us at manyconstantworlds@gmail.com, DM us on Instagram, and check out our Patreon. All links can be found in the description of our episodes.
We work really hard for the Patreon, and Megan gets mad if we don't say that.
We work hard for that money.
So hard for that money.